The mysteries that lie beyond the veil of darkness are best left unseen, unheard, unknown. But there are those with the temerity to bargain with malevolent forces and to harness the unspeakable powers that will surely lead to terror at Collinwood. Be careful, my friend, where you tread, for I warn you now, there are spoilers ahead. Welcome to Terror at Collinwood. I am your hostess, Danielle, aka Penny Dreadful, and I am absolutely flabbergasted and absolutely honored to have my guest here today. The powerful witch Angelique Bouchard-Collins first appeared on Dark Shadows on November 22nd, 1967, and became an instant sensation. The character remained an integral part of the series, returning on a regular basis to weave her spells on the residents of Collinsport and on Dark Shadows viewers. Joining me to celebrate Angelique's 55th anniversary is Lara Parker, the incredibly talented actress who played the role and several others on the show, as well as in the MGM film Night of Dark Shadows. In addition, she's appeared in many television shows, including Kolchak the Night Stalker, The Incredible Hulk, and The $6 Million Man, and in films such as the Oscar-winning Save the Tiger, the horror action thriller Race with the Devil, and in two of Ansel Farage's Dr. Mabuse films. She is also a successful author and has written 4 books that are set in the Dark Shadows universe: Angelique's Descent, The Salem Branch, Wolf Moon Rising, and Heiress of Collinwood. Lara has also reprised her Angelique role in a number of the Dark Shadows audio dramas from Big Finish. It is my great honor and privilege to welcome the one and only Lara Parker to the show. Thank you for joining me today, Lara.
Oh, hi, Danielle. Hi. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on.
Oh my goodness, what a pleasure it is to have you here today.
Well, thank you.
Well, I know you recently just celebrated a birthday as of this recording. How did that go?
84. Yes. In fact, I had a Zoom meeting, and I had visitors, one from Bali and one from Nice, France. So it was really amazing. And then several from around the country on my birthday. It was really a great birthday present.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I was telling you before we started recording, I was at Seaview on Halloween, Seaview Terrace, and I ran into Jimmy Hutchinson, and he told me he had sent you flowers, and I just thought that was the greatest.
He always sends me flowers.
Oh, that's so sweet.
It is, yes.
So I know last year you were involved in this Christmas Carol event. It was a cast reunion with the Dark Shadows cast, which was sensational. I loved it.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness, I loved it. It won a Rondo Award.
We had one rehearsal. I don't know how we did it.
Wow, I can't believe it. It was just you. I guess because you had all worked together so often back when you were doing Dark Shadows. Maybe it just was kind of like an organic getting the team back together.
Well, we had conventions every year for a long time, so we stayed friends. We'd see each other once a year and catch up. And so it's been an unusual show in that respect, that all of us have remained in touch with one another, and we all like each other. And it's been an added blessing, in a sense, to have an extended family, which is the Dark Shadows family, those of us that are still around.
Oh, gosh, yeah. And I've had the good fortune to attend 2 of the Dark Shadows festivals. I wish I had gone to more, but I could see that camaraderie, right on stage as you were all interacting with each other. It was really a pleasure to see that. So we're here to celebrate the 55th anniversary of Angelique's first appearance on Dark Shadows. And as I was telling you before we started recording, my uncle introduced me to Dark Shadows when I was a child. And of course, I saw Barnabas, but he would tell me about their ghosts and werewolves. And I remember asking him, is there a witch? He said, oh, yeah. Angelique. Just the tone of his voice, I'll never forget. Yes. So, I mean, your character, like Barnabas, like Jonathan Frid's character, like Quentin, David Selby's character, your character became a pop culture icon. I mean, I have Angelique bubblegum cards and action figure and bobblehead and the lunchbox with Angelique on it.
I know, I have them too.
I love that you have them. I love that you have them. How does that feel? I mean, knowing that something that you
Wonderful.
helped bring to life. Yeah.
It feels wonderful. When I started out, I thought just being on a soap opera was, not certainly my goal, but it was wonderful to get a job. But, I wanted to be in the movies or on Broadway. Mm-hmm. And it was years later that I realized that had always been the best job I ever got. And then as the years have gone by and it's remained popular in so many areas, I've come to appreciate it a lot more.
Well, it certainly has quite a following still to this
day. It still
has
a following, and it almost seems to get better every time you watch it. I don't know what it is.
It does.
Magic, I guess.
Right? It really is. You mentioned Broadway. I mean, in many respects, Dark Shadows had that feel of live theater to it. Would that be accurate to describe it like a summer stock kind of a company?
It felt very much like summer stock. There were a lot of bloopers, a lot of things went wrong. They went on the air just as they would if you were on stage somewhere. Mm-hmm. And because we taped it live, mm-hmm. so the tape we did was not the tape that was shown that day, but it was never edited. Mm-hmm. So it was live. So if a mic came into the shot or a piece of the scenery fell over and bumped into a gravestone, which was made out of styrofoam, and it flopped at your feet, or a fly landed on your nose, all of these things went on the air. So it had that kind of, and more importantly, the feeling you had when you were doing the show was one of being in a live theater because of the fact that there was no editing. Mm-hmm. And so it had that kind of tension to the performances that I think gave it the energy that appealed to people so much.
Mm-hmm. And it still comes across this. There is that sort of just a feel to it that you certainly don't see on television these days, where everything is so processed and edited and refined to the point where mm-hmm. That's that.
Well, I did some more soap operas, and if you made a mistake, you got to stop.
Yeah.
But we didn't we were not allowed to stop.
Sure.
So if someone forgot their lines, you just had to kind of help them along until they remembered them.
Right. Which you were very good. I know sometimes Jonathan would drop a line here and there, but you were always really good at kind of picking up on it.
He had a hard time with lines.
Yeah.
He freely admitted this, mm-hmm. and he always wanted to run lines.
Yeah.
He catch you in the hallway and say, let's run our scene. Come on, let's just run our scene.
Right.
Because he just did it all by memorization. Mm-hmm. Other people learn lines by a kind of interior action that mm-hmm. the lines are part of. But mm-hmm. Other people just memorize. And when you just memorize, you can go blank.
Right.
And you know where you are, and you have no idea what your line is. It's very scary.
What do you do to memorize lines?
I create an action under the lines, mm-hmm. and the action is the through action of the scene, so that it's every single moment is motivated by the moment that came before. So I may not know exactly what the words are, but I know what I'm going to say because I know what my reaction is.
Right.
Because I create an under the lines action, mm-hmm. and it's really the better way to learn lines.
Right. Oh, yeah. To associate that action with the feeling and what. Yeah, absolutely. Now your character, Angelique, of course, is known and beloved by so many fans. And you played a witch. You also played a vampire at one point. But I look at Angelique as sort of a successor to that archetype of Medea. I played Medea in the Greek tragedy once, and she's, of course, this vengeful sorceress from Greek tragedy who, to get revenge on her husband, who's gone off to be with the princess, she murders her own children. Is Angelique, did you draw on any of that, or was this something that, were you pulling from any sort of previously existing witch archetypes at all in your portrayal?
I've been asked this a lot. Were you into spells and witchcraft, and do you believe in witchcraft? And of course, the answer is no. But right. I was, I had a pretty good education, mm-hmm. and I was very much interested in Greek mythology mm-hmm. and Greek drama. And but did I draw on it? I don't think so. Other than just maybe subconsciously, because there was a sense of it was very highly dramatic, our show. We were encouraged to play every scene with a kind of heightened emotion.
Yeah.
The directors would say, I want more from you, or you're not going to get your close up, or, something like that was silly. But they wanted that sense of that dynamic, dramatic sense. And they also wanted us to play it make it completely believable. And we didn't do it with that arch kind of campy performance the way Johnny Depp did in the movie.
Right.
Winking at the audience and say, look at me, I'm a vampire, I'm hanging upside down from the chandelier like a bat.
Right.
Our vampire was very, very scary, but very real and very serious.
Yeah.
And we were all encouraged to create that heightened sense of realism rather than spookiness or campiness. And that didn't mean that the show didn't come out campy. It did. Because, when you tell someone to return to their grave and they're covered with, bloody pieces of cloth and their eyeballs are hanging out, it's campy. But we always played it for real.
Right. Well, it's that willing suspension of disbelief, right? I mean,
yes.
and it's intrinsic to the Gothic tradition to play with heightened emotion, as you know, studying literature, and that's accurate. I mean, the way that you were playing it, and it didn't come. I always, when I read these articles, I say, "Oh, the camp classic, Dark Shadows." I always say that's. I don't feel it was campy at all because you were playing it in the Gothic tradition,
I would have loved to have had snakes for hair, though.
Oh my goodness, wouldn't that?
What a good idea.
I know you told stories about kids being afraid of you when they'd see you and stuff. What was that like?
Well, it always took me by surprise. I mean, the fact that there were fans outside the studio door in the afternoon when we came out, I was always surprised. I was pretty young, and it took me a while to even get used to the fact that our show was so popular. And the rehearsal room filled up with piles of mail, and that people began to recognize us on the street. And I had 2 children, so I'd take them to the baseball game or the zoo in New York City, and people would recognize me. And a lot of times, if they were small or young children, they were terrified and they'd scream. I had a bunch of kids get out of school. I was on a subway platform and they recognized me and they went screaming, running to the other end of the platform. It was, it was silly, but I found it very amusing and, of course, very satisfying in a way to think that my character was. That was until I began to get hate calls at the studio and threatening me with death if I didn't stop torturing Barnabas.
Oh no. the line between fantasy and reality was blurred.
People took it a little bit too seriously.
Right. Well, it's interesting too because I want to get to this, but how did your kids react to the fact that you were, other kids were running in fear from?
They did not want me to pick. They went to PS 41 and they told me I had to wait 2 blocks away. They were very, very embarrassed.
Oh my goodness.
They didn't like it at all.
And now, of course, your character, you became the primary antagonist of the show for a while. I always say Barnabas and Angelique are kind of 2 sides of the same coin because Barnabas did some pretty rotten things too. I thought that dynamic was fascinating between the 2 of you, and you had really great chemistry together because you were both playing the dark and the light sides. And Angelique, much like Barnabas and Quentin, became more sympathetic, I feel, as the show went on.
More boring, yes.
More boring, you think? Yeah, why so?
Well, the interesting thing is I had done a lot of high school and college theater, a lot of summer stock. And, I was a blue-eyed blonde, and I'd always been cast as the heroine. So when I got the part of Angelique, I assumed that I was the heroine. And I'd work on crying and creating real tears and things. And Jonathan Frid, who was actually, if you watch his documentary, was a student of acting to a greater degree than any of us ever realized. And he had done a lot of theater, a lot of Shakespeare. And he said to me one day, you're wasting this role. You're not the heroine. You're the heavy. You're the villain. And I said, oh, mm-hmm. And he said, yeah, you should just, take this role in your teeth and make the most of it, because their heroines come and go, but you'll never get another chance to play this kind of character again. And I listened to him, and it took me a while, to say, to dig down deep and find the anger and the jealousy and the resentment, and to realize that I had the powers that witches had, and to make the most of the part. And I think that he kind of gave me the incentive to see her. And I actually think of it as a triangle, which is, I think, more powerful than two sides of a coin, which is that Josette was the other.
Oh, yeah.
So Josette, who was truly the heroine, totally innocent. And then Barnabas, who was torn between these two women, attracted to both of them, but of course wanted to marry the girl who came from the fine family and not the servant who was beneath him. But he had seduced her and abandoned her, and she would have none of it. So that gave us that tension between three characters, which seemed to always work. Dan Curtis would say, if the ratings dropped, he'd say, I'm going to go back to the original story, because that always brings them back in.
Yeah. And he called you and Jonathan his big guns, didn't he? He'd bring you on,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
How did you feel? Okay, this is something that I know some fans like and some fans don't like. I'm curious what your thoughts are on it. And I've always put a spoiler tag at the top of the show. This happens at the end of the series, where Barnabas realizes that he actually loves Angelique because she did something selfless for him, and of course she dies in his arms, and he never gets to declare his love. Now, how do you feel about that? That's how it ended up. Like you mentioned, this triangle with Josette, but ultimately Barnabas declares.
Thought it was silly.
Really?
I mean, it was silly, because the thing that keeps the attention of the audience is if there's not a realization. And if you've looked at many television shows, if the heroine and the hero don't get together, but you desperately want them to, you hang in there. Right. But once it's resolved, you lose interest. So I just think that the writers decided to tie the thing up because they had to go. We had to go off the air.
Right.
I think if we'd stayed on the air, that would never have happened.
But yeah, probably so. And then they shifted over to this parallel time storyline, and you played Catherine in this Wuthering Heights.
Well, I never let go of this desire to be the heroine. But Catherine was really boring compared to.
Well, I enjoyed it, but.
Well, thank you. I don't mean Catherine Lee Scott. I mean the role of Catherine. Yeah, she's never boring.
No, certainly not. No. You also, during your journey in Dark Shadows, and there were so many great theater actors as well. And I'm sure you are often asked about working with Jonathan and Catherine. I wanted to ask you about a couple of other actors, though, on the show working with them. You had a lot of scenes with Thayer David when he played Ben, your servant Ben, the servant of the witch. How was it working with Thayer?
He was very easy to work with. Extremely dependable, and he had a photographic memory. He didn't forget his lines.
Yeah.
And he played a kind of bumbling, stupid servant character, and I had to boss him around. But he was not that in real life. He was much more sophisticated. I also really enjoyed working with Humbert.
I was going to ask about Humbert. Yeah.
Yeah. He had his own theater company in San Francisco, and he was an acting teacher. And he was another one that used to, I was really just starting out. This is my first professional job. And he gave me a lot of, he worked with me on acting techniques and simple things like, what do you see there? What are you using? If you're screaming your head off because someone puts a cross in your face, right?
You're right. Right.
And the cross is supposed to send you into hysteria. Might be better to put something there in its place, like a big tarantula or something.
Oh, I see.
And if you do that, if you do that kind of thing, he talked to me about these techniques, which I didn't know anything about. I was pretty new at it, and it's pretty scary to do 3 rehearsals and suddenly be on the air in front of hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, when you think about it, you don't want to even think about it.
Right.
It's like being on a bridge or something and don't look down, because it's kind of overwhelming. And it takes a lot of experience to just be able to work on camera. In other words, to get past the fear, stage fright, how tense you are. And there's a lot of things to remember. You have to be on your mark. You have to be in the light. You have to remember the kinds of reactions that the director wants, because he switches the camera to you to get your face. You have to remember a lot of techniques. And we had very little rehearsal. Sure. And, we get there in the morning. At around 8 o'clock, we'd block it. We'd run through it a couple of times. Then we go down on the set and do the actual blocking with the cameras, which was much more tedious because every single shot had to be written down and practiced, and you had to be on your mark. They had little X's they put on the floor with tape, and if you were on your mark, you wouldn't be in the light, and you had to remember which camera. They had little red lights on them, but you had to be aware which camera was. And then the whole time you had to be acting. Mm-hmm. So it was, we all got to be pretty good at it. We got to be facile, but it was never easy.
Could you hear the I know Sybil Weinberger was up in the booth playing the music. Could you hear the music from the studio? No. Mm-mm. Some people have asked about that, so I've just the next time.
The music added so much.
Yes. Oh, sure. Bob Colbert was brilliant. And you mentioned talking about Humbert Allen Estrada. Your scenes with Humbert were sensational. Now, this is something that I don't know if some fans have asked and just debated it. Is he meant to be a warlock or a demon?
Warlock. I think he was a warlock. I think he worked for the devil.
Yeah, the both of you did. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Some of the incantations that Angelique would have to say were rather disturbing at times. Were those difficult to memorize, or did it ever?
They're very difficult to memorize.
I would imagine so.
Because they're not really seated in anything. They're just a bunch of words. Yeah. But that was the one thing you might be able to sneak a peek at the teleprompter. Glaze your eyes and go into the incantation, but read from the teleprompter.
Speaking of eyes, when you flash that glare at someone on camera, I mean, it was just you put on the witch mode, and it was great. No, you also got to play a vampire on the show. Angelique Nicholas, Lara Humbert's character, turned Angelique into a vampire as punishment. What was it like playing a vampire? You got to be on Johnny Carson too, and bit Johnny Carson.
Well, as I'm sure you've been told, we were sent to the dentist, and we were given an actual dental, what would you call it, a piece that stuck over our own teeth and made perfect vampire teeth. Mm-hmm. And you just carried it in your hand, and when the camera went to the other person, you put it in. Mm-hmm. And when the camera came back to you, we had 3 cameras. When the camera came back to you, you had your teeth. Mm-hmm. So then you just went with your mouth open, and you were a vampire. One of the fun things I got to do is I got to be on the Johnny Carson show. Mm-hmm. And I did the same thing. He said, what's it like? And I said, well, come here. And because I said, come to me for comfort. And he went into my arms, and the camera, of course, was on his face, my teeth in. The camera came back to me, and I bit down on his neck as hard as I could. And he spun around 3 times and did a pratfall on the floor. He was great.
I love it.
It was, the concentration was never on whether or not we had an opinion about witches or vampires or whether the storyline was to our liking. The concentration was always on the performance. It puts your mind in a different place. You're not judging it, not saying, I don't really believe this is working. You're just trying to make it work with everything you have. And there's a lot more goes into that than into having opinions about what's happening, or about witchcraft itself or vampires themselves. The assumption was it all works. Yeah. If the actors believe it, it all works. Mm-hmm. So
was it Dan Curtis who was, I always read, that Dan was the one who was kind of bringing in these ideas about the supernatural characters and storylines and things like that. What was Dan like to work with?
He was intimidating for me. He was very brusque, impatient, easily irritated, easily annoyed, but very, very much wanted it to be good. And, he hit upon a great idea and introduced, this was the first time I think that I ever had the supernatural in daytime TV. And it took off, mostly because of the times that we lived in. We had a lot of people waking up from being stoned at 4:00 in the afternoon.
Yes.
There was a lot going on out there in terms of psychedelics, and the Vietnam War, and the country was in turmoil, and Dark Shadows was somehow fit the time. It was an escape, and it was really, really different from anything else. And I think Dan was really smart to come up with the idea, and he went with it, and he encouraged the writers to do research. Dark Shadows ended up in some way or another retelling almost every great horror classic that had been written. Frankenstein, all of them, Turn of the Screw.
Sure.
And in a wonderful way, he went back and told the whole history of Gothic horror for the audience. And he said many times, it's Gothic romance, which, his definition of it was that it was intrinsic to the literary tradition.
You were saying Dan Curtis would define it as more as Gothic romance, and I brought up the idea of the terror versus horror. There is some horror in Dark Shadows. You'll see a severed arm or something like that, but it's that thing that's lurking in the shadows that you just catch a glimpse of. That I think there's a sort of a dark fantasy element to Dark Shadows. Would you agree with that?
Yes, very much. In fact, I've actually written a lot about this. The concept of terror lies in the viewer's imagination or the reader's imagination. It's the scratching down the hall or the shuffling under your bed. It's not the monster. And it creeps up the spine, and that's how you get your hair standing on end. It's what you imagine is out there, which is more frightening than anything that's what you would call horror, which is, as you said, the severed limb or the eyeball falling out of the socket, or just the bloody gore of the vampire's bite. Because I think you're repulsed by that. You pull away and you go, ugh, which means you're distancing yourself emotionally. Whereas terror, it feeds you and you're drawn to it. So you're much more involved. People don't realize that. They think they want to see horror, but what they really want to experience is terror. And I think that's what Dan was aware of, and I think that's more what we tried to do.
I agree. I think in the film versions, the horror aspect was increased a little bit more in those,
but it was beautiful, wasn't it?
Oh yeah. How did you
like Carolyn's staking is one of the best things I've ever seen.
Oh my goodness. Nancy Barrett was she was a great
she was just great. Yeah.
How did you find
picturesque?
Yes. And while they were filming House of Dark Shadows, you and David Selby were sort of holding down the fort on the TV show in the parallel time storyline, where you played an alternate version of Angelique and Alexis. And there was this whole Rebecca storyline going on the show. And was that difficult to keep track of, like an alternate version of Angelique? Was that
No, as I said, the difficulties were in the performance. It wasn't different because the storyline was different. It was still hard to do,
Gotcha. What about the movie? You starred in.
That was really fun.
Night of Dark Shadows.
Well, we were indulged. We had time to do the scenes, to do them, to take the time to make them really work. And there's just so much more indulgence when you do films than I mean, daytime TV is one of the hardest things there is to do, especially if you have to play emotions. Deep, dramatic scenes. It's hard to do.
Sure.
It's one thing to sit around the kitchen table and talk about Martha's divorce, but it's another thing to play, crawling out of a grave and becoming some kind of a ghoul.
Yeah, I would imagine.
The nice thing about the movie is, this is funny, I can say the nice thing, but the fun thing is I got to actually be hanged.
Oh yes, that's right. Yeah.
And that's an interesting little contraption. It's like a harness they put on you.
Yeah.
It's strapped on you, and the rope comes up the back of the harness and through the noose, and it looks very much like it's the noose around your neck.
Right.
And
right.
I love doing it. Kicking and wiggling and
oh my goodness. Yeah. I wish I know Darren Gross has done a lot of work to he's found the lost footage from Night of Dark Shadows and put it back together, and I'd love to see a release of the full Night of Dark Shadows, because of course it was heavily edited by
they've been trying to do that for years and years and years. And it's I think it's a matter of MGM, who owns the film, coming up with the money to re-edit it so that they can put the scenes. So many of the scenes apparently were cut. They said the movie was too long, and it kind of took the meat out of it. That's what Dan said.
Yeah.
I never paid any. Whatever it was, it was. I'd love to see it come. One of the things that Jim Pearson's tried to do is, he's always said, if we can just get that movie back out there, we can have another convention and have a great old time.
I would hope so. I think that would be. Would you be up for doing another convention?
I'm still alive. Yeah.
I know some of the actors want to. Some of the actors are a little more hesitant. But
oh no, they didn't believe me. Everybody would come.
Oh,
they carry on and complain, but they'd come.
So you heard it here, folks. If make some noise, you want another Dark Shadows Festival. I know during COVID, now that we're kind of coming out of that, ideally that'll continue to improve. Hopefully we can have something like that again. That would be great. Earlier, you mentioned, you were talking about the wonderful music from the show. Robert Cobert created a song for your character, the parallel time version of Angelique, Ode to Angelique. So what do you think of your theme song?
Oh, I thought the music was one of the best things about the show and the films. And I thought everybody got a song, and it was just an added delight for me. And I love my song, of course.
It's a great song. And I did an episode on Robert Cobert's music with a fan who is a musician, and he played few bars from each of the songs we talked about. And the other Angelique song that we loved was the spell casting music. When Angelique is casting a spell, there's this sort of sound. Anytime I think of a witch casting a spell, that music comes into my head. It's just this very it's just evocative of that.
It's evocative, yes. And I thought the costumes were wonderful too.
Oh
sets.
My goodness! Yeah.
It was otherworldly in so many ways. It's theatrical.
Yeah, absolutely. And these wonderful theater actors, yourself included, who are performing. Clarice Blackburn, she's another one
she's a wonderful actress. Wonderful.
Yeah, she was sensational. Now, after the show ended, you continued to do shows. You were in Kolchak, The Night Stalker. You played a witch in that. Did you get a lot of offers to play witch characters after Dark Shadows?
That was the only one.
Oh, was the only one? Yeah.
And Darren McGavin said to me, nobody understands how to do this kind of thing. And he didn't have any idea who I was or what I had done. He didn't ever watch daytime TV.
Right. And
he said, I don't know how to tell people how to do this because no one gets it. I went, okay.
But
that was a silly part. They covered me with blue paint.
I remember that.
Stand there and scream. It was really ridiculous.
Right. Oh gosh. Yeah.
Every single show had its following. And that show had its following. And the people who followed that show loved that particular episode.
Oh, it was great.
So it was good. Yeah.
And the people who knew you as Angelique, it was like an extra bonus to see you playing another witch. I always say these, there are so many TV shows now that feature supernatural themes and witch characters. Like there's this new Netflix show. Well, it's been a couple of years, the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, and they always have witch references. And I said, well, they should get Lara to be on this show or do a part on the show, or
Yes.
at least have an Angelique poster on the wall or something in the background.
Yeah, right. Some mention.
Yes, I would.
Some reference. Sure.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. They absolutely should. Now, you went on, of course, to write several novels that were set in the Dark Shadows world, including really filling out the history of your character with Angelique's descent. And I got the Salem branch from you at a festival, and you signed it, Hugs and Curses, Lara Parker. I still have that. So what was it like diving into that world as a writer?
Well, it was really a wonderful opportunity. It was mostly by chance. There was an editor at HarperCollins who got the idea of doing a series of Dark Shadows novels. And Jim Pearson said, well, Lara's been taking screenwriting classes at, UCLA Extension, and she's, interested in writing. So she had a meeting with me, and she said, we'd like for you to, write the first one. And I have no idea how to write a novel. I mean, I've never in a million years would have imagined myself doing anything like that. And she said, well, I tell you what, if you just, try to come up with something, and then we'll get one of our staff writers, professional writer, to come in and kind of fix it. And that way we can put your name on it. And I think a lot of actors in various TV shows have done this. They've written for the TV show, and they've had a professional writer kind of clean it up and turn it into a real book. But when she said that, I was kind of insulted. I said, you mean I would work on something and write it and somebody would change it?
Yeah.
I mean, you can imagine I was. So she said, well, just see what you can do. Send me the first 50 pages. So I did what anyone would have done. I started reading novels for how they were written rather than the story. And I tried really hard to figure out how to do it from the standpoint of craft. And I couldn't even, I'd start to read something like Moby Dick, and I go, I can't do anything like this. I think it was Daphne du Maurier, the first time I read a story that I thought was a simple enough, straightforward style that maybe I could do something like that. So I started writing, and I sent her 50 pages, and she said, way too many adjectives. That was her first criticism, and that was a good one, because she was right. They were very overwritten. But she said better overwritten, because you can always pull it back. And she worked with me back and forth and back and forth. And I realized that my time on the show had given me a kind of awareness of how stories progressed. And I had a kind of knack for horror. I don't know where it came from. I really don't. It just maybe from all the reading I did when I was when I was a little girl and when I was in college. I was pretty much a reader. And I just was lucky in the sense that, everyone didn't agree. I got a lot of bad reviews. But for the most part, the fans were very responsive because they were so hungry for any kind of story about the characters. And I had the setting and the characters, to use. They were already in place. And all I had to do was create new stories. And I wanted so badly to tell the story of my character, how she became a witch, and make her more sympathetic and make her understandable, and for you to see how torn she was. And of course, like anybody, I've experienced heartbreak in romance. So I don't know. I just, I really was lucky in the sense that I got this opportunity. And then they said, well, why don't you do another one? So I said, I have to really take this seriously now. And I went to graduate school and got a master's in creative writing. And I took classes in all kinds of writing. And I did a lot of reading and wrote a lot of essays. And I broadened my understanding to a certain degree. And then I did another one. And then the fourth one, The Heiress of Collinwood. I don't even know how I did it. I was just so worn out by then. I can't even remember writing that one. But a lot of people like it the best because it's first person, which in a certain way makes it more accessible. So it was really a great experience. Some people write another one. I go, no, I don't have it in me.
How did you structure your day in terms of writing? Did you set aside time every morning to do it, or was it?
Mostly I wrote in the afternoon. I finally start to feel so guilty. I'd sit down and do something. I'm not a disciplined person.
Me neither.
If I had it to do over again, I would try very hard to make it a daily activity. And sometimes I write all night, right into the night. I wrote yellow pad and pencil, and so that typing was the first edit, and that worked for me. I also had both times HarperCollins and Tor, who did the last 3 books, asked for an outline. So I submitted an outline, and that would be the beginning. And I did the outline on a board with 30 or 40 cards, the way you do a screenplay. And I'd move card to card. And I'd count how many I had left. And I'd always do the word count, because I had to get to 350 pages before I was done. It was kind of a struggle in a lot of respects. But if you want to know the truth, that's what writing is. You just have to do it every day.
Yeah.
And my husband is a builder, and he said, if you're going to build a house, you got to go to work every day. And after a while, the house is there. And I went, yep, it's not inspiration, and it's just plugging along. Yeah. And especially when you just scribble with a pencil, it doesn't have that, that what would you call it, that permanence to it that it does when you type it. And I circle things and move them around, and scribble things in the margin. And the wonderful thing when you're writing, when you really get into it, is that everything starts to feed you. Every offhand remark, everything you read in the newspaper, everything you see when you drive on the street, everything starts to feed you. And you say, I can use that. Well, maybe I could put that there in that place, and that would make this work. And it all starts to kind of braid into itself and weave into itself. And that's when it's really fun.
Oh, yeah. And you clearly did a lot of research as well, because I live in Massachusetts. I'm from Massachusetts, but I lived in Salem for 6 months. And
really?
Yeah. And a lot of the stuff.
You recognized a few things.
I sure did. I said, wow, she really did a lot of research and get some of the locations and just the whole vibe of it. I was like, wow.
I went to Salem, yeah.
Yeah, I saw the video of that. There's one of the DVDs where you visit Salem, which was fantastic. Was that fun researching that? I'm sad too.
Very, because the trials themselves are actually written down. You can get books and you can read the actual trials from them, which is what they were when they were questioned and how they responded, and the kinds of things that the ministers would say, and the way they would pray and the way they would word things, and just reeked of hypocrisy. And in every one of my books, I tried to find the underdog, those who were being treated unfairly. And in Angelique's descent, of course, it was the slaves in Martinique and the sugar plantation. And in Salem Branch, it was those who were accused of witchcraft, the older women, the scolds who had property that the town wanted to take away from them. And in Wolf Moon Rising, I can't remember. And then in the heiress, it was the gypsies. Which was fun. I did a lot of research of gypsies. Gypsies were an element in Dark Shadows that I had never investigated. And of course, the gypsies are definitely, there's a lot of prejudice against gypsies.
Sure.
So I found a lot of good stuff. Oh, I know. Wolf Moon Rising was prohibition.
Oh,
and the whole idea that if that you could end up in jail if you made moonshine, but if you had a lot of money, there was no problem. You could have all the rum you wanted. So the whole idea of division of the classes and how the wealthy had their way
Right.
And that was fun doing the research on the 20s. I read and read and read about the 20s. I mean, you think you know all about it, but when you start to read about it, it's a lot of fun. And so that part of Wolf Moon Rising was fun.
And it must have been fun writing about, you had written Salem Branch and Angelique's Descent, and then you kind of shifted the focus now to writing about Quentin, and then you did Victoria Winters. So then exploring other. Did you revisit episodes of the show to kind of refamiliarize yourself with some of that?
Yeah. And I was so fortunate. I mean, I was given such free reign. A lot of people who write for shows, like I talked to one writer who wrote for Buffy. She said, you really have to toe the line. They have rules, things you can't do, things you can't change the stories, can't change the characters. The thing is that nobody really paid any attention to what I did. I don't think anybody who was in charge ever read any of my books, but the fans loved them. So
you made some really unique and interesting choices there. Like you explored in the show, they touched a little bit on Angelique's backstory with the whole Miranda thing, which they never really clarified how that worked. Like, is Angelique a reincarnation of Miranda, et cetera? But you went into more depth. So Angelique is meant to be the reincarnation of Miranda, correct?
Yes, they're supposed to be I love the whole idea of reincarnation. And I love the fact that she lived each time. And each of the book has a season, all 4 seasons. And
right.
each of the books has, she is born of earth, air, fire, and water. And each of the 4 books is one of those. I mean, not many people are going to pick up on that. But it was fun for me.
No, that's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. Salem Branch was the fall, of course.
Yeah.
It was the trees. And the fact that she actually had power over the trees responded to her. And that she flew through the trees and slept in the trees. And I just thought that was all great.
Yeah.
And then Wolf Moon Rising was the winter. There's lots and lots of snow. And like that.
Right. Yeah. I'd love to see, I had a Jim Beard on here, who was the editor of the recent book that came out, Running Home to Shadows, which was a collection of essays about people who grew up watching Dark Shadows. And he at one point, he's done a lot of fiction as well, and he pitched the idea, I think it was to Tor, of doing a Dark Shadows anthology book with you writing the lead story in the book, and then other authors also contributing tales in the Dark Shadows world. And I thought that was a great idea, but I guess they said anthologies just in general don't sell as well as novels, so they nixed the idea. But I would love to see something like that, and I'd love to see you contribute to that as well.
Yeah, well, I have contributed to some. I don't know what happened to them, but I think that Tor would be willing to do almost anything. But, you have to. I was just always very, very lucky that they let me do another one.
Oh, you got to do 4.
And I think I don't think Era's sold well enough for them to. I don't think they would do a 5th. But I don't know. Maybe somebody else could apply and make an effort.
Well, I would hope that you would also,
because I think there's a big market out there. I think there's still a lot of people who love to read.
Yeah, and
I mean, next has to be, of course, Josette. Her story has never been told. And so there's another level to Josette. Which is
tantalizing hints here.
Yeah.
That would be great.
She's not all sweetness and honey.
I had a feeling there was another element there. You also got to do the big finish audios. You returned to your role as Angelique. Is there anything brewing as far as that goes, or
not anymore?
Oh.
For years, we got to do these audio dramas. Of course, they had nothing to do with Dark Shadows. They were not told in the tone of Dark Shadows.
Yep.
And they were, most of them were written by people in England who just wrote all kinds of different ways, but it wasn't Dark Shadows. But we stopped complaining. We just went in and made our money.
Right. I liked some of the earlier, like Kingdom of the Dead. I had Stuart Manning on here, and I was talking about Kingdom of the Dead, and some of those earlier ones I felt were a little closer to Dark. I feel like it's kind of wandered off on its own.
Yeah, I think in the beginning they tried a lot harder. But then as they continued to be successful enough to sell, and they, scratching for writers and scratching for actors, most of us, well, some of us were, very grateful for the opportunity to work and came in and gave it our all.
And it was great hearing you again, all of you, and reprising your roles. It was really cool to hear that, and you all interacting with each other and doing scenes together and stuff. So that was super fun. And I know a lot of fans would love to see it continue. So, but I was curious because I haven't heard anything lately about Big
I don't
Finish.
think they're doing any more, but that is a kind of enjoyable activity because it's just sound. It's just your voice. So you don't have to worry about how you look and what, whether your reaction is on camera or whether your hair's been done or anything, it's just talk. And it's kind of an interesting craft to do, voice drama. Yeah.
Sure. Last thing I want to ask you about do you have any thoughts you want to share with fans on this auspicious occasion of your legendary character's 55th anniversary here? Like any thoughts on Angelique or the fans? Or
all I can say about the fans of this show is they are, each and every one is a treasure, and I'm so grateful to them because they've kept the show alive, and we're going 50 plus years, which is just ridiculous. And the fact that we had 2 films made, and then Johnny Depp came along and made one. I mean, it's just unbelievable that we've had this kind of run. And I'm grateful to the fans. The fans they're the most loyal fans you could ever imagine. And they stick with the show and they talk about it and they love it. And just my gratitude knows no bounds. I love them all.
That's wonderful. And everyone adores you. I mean, anytime I've mentioned your name, I mean, everybody just lights up. And
that's very sweet.
Certainly, as listeners know, for many years, I did a local horror movie show as Penny Dreadful the Witch. And I always, anytime anybody interviews me and says, oh, what are your inspirations for your witch character? Angelique is always in that list. I always say Lara Parker's Angelique. Fantastic.
Well, the nice thing about a witch is she can make mistakes. And I built that into the character, and I built it into the character in all the novels. She was prone to mess up.
Yes, and then it's fun to watch her scrambling to try to
get out of it. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. She was young and often foolish, and I loved that about her. So. Yeah.
Are there any plans? Can you hint at for another cast online Zoom reunion like you did with the Christmas Carol, or is that?
Well, if Catherine Lee Scott has her way, there will be.
Oh, good.
She's the great energy behind continuing to find activities that'll interest the fans, and she's very good at it. And I tend to just, when she calls, I say okay. But I don't think them up but I don't know. I suppose I think the second movie, if they ever get it re-released, it might be an opportunity for celebration. And I hope that happens.
And there's also I had Mark Perry on here talking about the Dark Shadows reincarnation. If that ever gets off the ground, it sounds like that.
What did he say?
It sounds like there's movement on it. I mean, the last time I had him on was around Christmas, and he was still pitching it to streaming channels, but he's recently started posting online that he's still pursuing it, and that he said, I'm still climbing Widow's Hill. He's very determined to get this going because he's a big fan too. So it would be.
I wrote him a letter and I said, I'd just like to sit down and talk to you because I do think that most of the people who've tried to do Dark Shadows again have missed something really important. And I wanted to talk to him about that because I do think there's a tendency, the world has changed and we don't live in the same innocence and naivete, oddly enough, as we did when Dark Shadows was on the air. I mean, if you think back, we really did believe that love is all you need. We thought we could walk around and put flowers in the muzzles of guns of the guards that sit around and guarded the schools, for instance. And now we know that that's not so. The world has changed. And Dark Shadows represented something that it was deeper than the escape into horror. It was a kind of radical alternative way of seeing the world. And today, people are so sophisticated. They want to make sure that you see that they get the joke. They're not taken in.
Uh-huh.
And that's a mistake. Dark Shadows has to have a deep kind of sincerity and belief in, it is an ultimate morality in that show that goes very deep, and a belief that there is goodness in people. That's why all the evil characters ended up doing good things.
Yeah.
And the dichotomy between what is evil in people and what is their tendency towards goodness. And, those elements have to be investigated. You can't just be clever. And that's one of the things I wanted to tell him. And, but he wrote me back and he said, sorry, I'm not allowed to talk to you. And I haven't read any of your books. He wanted to make sure that I knew that so that I wouldn't accuse him of copying something.
Oh gosh, yeah, maybe it's
I know there's that
legal thing, yeah.
Yeah, there's that element. It exists, and everyone is very, very careful. Mm-hmm. And I was not interested in any. I didn't want any money, and I didn't want any credit. I just wanted to tell him the feelings I have about what made Dark Shadows so fascinating and so successful. Mm-hmm. And but he wasn't interested in talking to me.
I'm sure that he's a fan, been a fan since childhood, and and if you go back and listen to that interview, he certainly is very sincere in his approach to it. And I think I absolutely agree with you about the deep morality and how these characters who were started as antagonists in the show would sort of gradually become the protagonists of the show. The supernatural characters who caused all these horrible things to happen there was some glimmer of hope in there that they would they would strive for that somehow. That's an excellent insight that you. And
when you think about the vampire, what is it about the vampire that fascinates? Mm-hmm. And you realize that anything that's dead, even if it's a bug on the floor, makes you go, ooh, get it away, Mm-hmm. You pull away from it. You feel disgust. And the concept of immortality, which is living forever, is the ultimate dream of the human being, right? You don't want to die. You want to live forever, right? You want to have immortality. So that's why we have religion. And you put those two things together. You're repulsed by death, but you want to live forever, even after you're dead. And here comes this creature who is living forever, but is dead. You have a real kind of tension between two elements that are pulling against each other. And you start thinking about what life means. What is the meaning of life? Are we, is it to live forever? Or is it to live a good life while we're here? And you really start to delve into what morality is. And I don't think many people think about Dark Shadows in those terms. But if you think about why we love vampires, and you go, I don't know, we just do. And then you think about what it means, to be engaged and fascinated by something that is not only alive, but alive forever. And would we want this? Mm-hmm. And what is it to be a vampire? What is it to be immortal? Is it that great?
Right. Sure.
Is it that great to be living forever? Mm-hmm. Or does it come with its own problems?
And
so I don't know.
It resonates on that on that level, though, for sure. I mean, I think even if people maybe aren't conscious of it, even I think you're right. It is connecting on that level as well, because these are things we all struggle with as human beings, our mortality, So, and
we certainly do.
Sure.
We do. Yeah.
So excellent insights. What a delightful conversation this was, Lara.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh,
on
I
the
enjoyed
show.
it. You know, obviously I can talk forever about these things. So you just have to be the one to shut me up.
Oh gosh, I'll have to have you back on sometime so we can do a part 2 down the road and continue this fascinating exploration. And happy anniversary to Angelique.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And please do celebrate by popping in an Angelique episode, or however you want to recite one of the favorite Angelique.
Well, you've been wonderful. I mean, what insightful questions. I don't think I've ever, I guess it's because you're an English teacher, right?
Thank you. That's
one to another.
I'm blushing. Yes, yeah. You taught English too, so the essay grading pile continues to grow every week. But thank you very much, and thank you for listening to Terror at Collinwood.
And as soon as you finish listening to this episode, please head on over to Lara Parker's official website at laraparkersite.blogspot.com, and there you can find autographed merchandise from Lara herself, and there's lots of great information on the site. It's a beautiful website, so do check it out. Also, big thank you to past Terror at Collinwood guest Rod Labby. Be sure to read Rod's great interview with Lara Parker in Retrofan magazine number 17, and I will put a link to that in the show notes. And if you listen to this podcast on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, and please be sure to like the video. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, if you get the opportunity, please do rate and review the podcast. That does help the podcast out, helps it to grow, and definitely please do share with your friends. If you have friends who are fans of Dark Shadows, let them know about the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. And for as long as they lived, the dark shadows never truly vanished, for there will always be terror at Collinwood. Terror at Collinwood is a Penny Dreadful production.